All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar, Yonah and Shashi Ehrenfeld, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Yonah's grandfather, Yosef ben Shmuel Aaron, Zichron Livracha. Benjamin and Elise Wall of Netanya, Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating the Shurim this month in memory of Moshe Chaim ben Tzvi Hirsch, Zichron Livracha. A week of learning sponsor, Hillary Jacobson Kent, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of her daughter, Shifra Bas Chanadina, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Josh and Miriam Brum, in honor of the Bas Mitzvah of their daughter, Gittel Suri. We hope them the merit of our Talmud Torah. This young lady should grow up to become an incredible Bas Yisrael and Akaras Habayis. All of the Neshama should have an Aliyah and their families in Nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. So a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Pei Aleph, 51. And we are up to Baruch Hashem, Pei Amud Beis, 50b. So we left off yesterday. 80b. We left off on Pei Amud Beis, 80b, and we left off at Itmar. So we'll say it is 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. A really fascinating sugya ahead of us. Says the Gemara, Itmar. Simani Sris. So remember again, we ended off yesterday's daf with a pretty comprehensive list of the various simanim, the various traits that would identify someone as a sris, right? As a sris. Remember again, I will say sris is the generic term for someone who is sterile. The more halachically specific term, let's say for a man, would be a krushavcha, pitsuadaka, but also sris, and for a woman, ultimately, once she's been confirmed as a sris, it's known as ailinus. So the Gemara says as follows. So simani sris. So when you have all of these simanim, Rav Huna Amar Achiu Kulam, Rav Huna says a person is only considered to be a sris once he possesses all of these, we'll call it qualities, or simanim. In other words, we'll say in that list, remember again, that we had, it was a pretty exhaustive list, right? Urine doesn't create a foam. There's no arc in the urine. Sheikh Vazer, the semen is watery. The urine doesn't putrefy, washes during the winter, and his skin does not create steam. Again, it's similar by ailiness. So Rav Huna says, in order to be considered a sris, you need to have all of these simanim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar no. Afilu be'echamer. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, not true. Even if a person has one of these simanim, that is enough to go ahead and make him into a sris. So we'll say, let's analyze this a little bit. So it says the Gemara, Heicha dehevi shtei sa'aros bezakan, koli amalo pligi da'atshu kulon. So we'll say, now watch this. It depends. So we'll say, remember, in this discussion, it's not necessarily an all or nothing. In other words, you could have a person who exhibits certain signs of maturity, but yet seems to be stunted in other areas. For example, the Gemara says like this: if the man in question brought 2 sa'ar, he has 2 hairs on his beard. But I will say, but there are other simanim that we see that are concerning. So ultimately, if you have 2 hairs on your beard, everyone agrees that in order to be considered a sris, you would have to have all of the other simanim, which I will say makes sense. Why? Because two hairs of a beard ultimately, again, represents some level of physical maturation. So yet there's all these other concerning signs. So the Gemara says, if you have 2 hairs on your beard, but lamaisa, then to be a sris, you would need all of the other simanim. Keep ligi. So I will say, where's the machlokes? Bishalo heavy. The machlokes is between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan, is in a case where a person did not bring, doesn't have hairs of a beard. So then the shaila is, do you need all of the simanim or one of the simanim? So the Gemara says, keep li b'shelo heavy. But I will say, what about the following case? It's actually a Maisa Shahaya. What happened? Rabba Baravua said to the Rabbanon, Ainu Bei Barav Nachman, I Bisara Ma'ala Hevel. Hey, right, so listen to this. Rabbi Baravuna was entertaining taking Rav Nachman as a son-in-law, as a match for his daughter. He was concerned that Rav Nachman did not seem to have physical signs of maturity. So Rabbi Bar Avua says to Rabbanan, do me a favor, hang around with Rav Nachman a little bit, and see Ibisara Ma'alaheva, it was winter time, and see, when he bathes, does his skin produce a vapor, right? Does it produce heat? So go and check. So I'll say, and if it does, Esav Libras, I'll go ahead and I'll marry off my daughter to him. So Rabbi say, now look at Rashi for just a moment. Esav Libras, Alma, Kevan the last nu kulu simani sris, the bitzar le hai, lo mechaskin like isris. So we'll say, the way Rashi understands this is as follows. Rav Nachman apparently had all of the other simanim of a sris. He had all of these simanim. So Rabbi Bar Avua says, the only siman I don't know is whether or not his skin emits vapor. So go see. If his skin emits vapor, then that means that what? He doesn't have all of the simanim of a sris, and therefore I'll be comfortable going ahead and giving my daughter to him. Kiman, kirafuna. Rabbi says, so this seems to reflect the view of Rav Huna, that halacha lamaisa, you're only a sris if you have all of these qualities. To which the Gemara says, no, lo, Rav Nachman. No, in fact, Rabbi Bar Avua sounds like Rav Nachman. So what was different about this case? Sichi dikna havile. I will say, interestingly enough, Rav Nachman ultimately had a couple of hairs in his beard. Rashi says over here, Sichi dikna yisedos hazakan kilomar bekam makomos hayilasar bezikno. He had, like a little patch here, a little patch there. He had a couple of hairs. So must remember, what did we say before? When you have hairs in your beard, so you're only a sris if you have all of the other simanim. So that's why Rabbi Bar Avua was saying to the Rabbana, look, I see a lot of the other simanim by Rav Nachman. The only one I don't know is the skin vapor test. Right? So see what's happening over there. If Emir Hashem, his skin emits the vapor, then he's not a sris. He's not a sris. And halacha l'maisa, I'll marry off my daughter to him. Rabbi say, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, the Rambam accepts the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that one does not have to have all of these simanim in order to be considered a sris. Rather, again, the presence of even some of these simanim, under certain circumstances, depending which siman, even one of the simanim would be enough to confirm a person as a sris. Okay, let's go back there. Hasris lo cholis v'lo miyabim b'chein eilenis. So I'll say, interestingly enough, so remember again, the Mishnah said that a sris does not do chalitza, does not do yibum. Right? And I remember again, in the Mishnah made a distinction between the sris chama and the sris adam. Right? That the sris chama, the person who's naturally born that way, at least according to Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Eliezer, was permitted to do it. But the Mishnah says, okay, a sris does not do chalitza and does not do yibum. Same thing with an islandess. So both is interesting. Katoni sris dumya da islandess. Rabbi say it is interesting that in this case where the Mishnah says that a sris doesn't do chalitza, the Mishnah is comparing a sris to an islandess. And what does that teach me? Ma islandess bidei shamayim. See, Rabbi say it's interesting. Only in the case of sris is there this distinction between a sris chama and a sris adam. A person naturally born this way or a person who was injured. By islandess, there's no such distinction, right? By islandess, every case of islandess is what? Born that way. So the Gemara says, by the way, the term itself, in other words, you could have a woman who's, let's say, infertile because of other injuries that occur, but that's not called an islandess. An islandess is a very specific situation of a woman who's born with an inability to have children. So it's interesting, the Gemara says over here that the Mishnah is linking the sris and the islandess. The Mishnah says, just like the sris doesn't do chalitza, so to the islandess doesn't do chalitza. To which the Gemara says, this teaching me a very important lesson. Katoni sris dumi the islandess, ma islandess bidei shamayim, just like an islandess is bidei shamayim, she's born this way. Af sris bidei shamayim. Ultimately, again, a sris that we're talking about is also bidei shamayim. Ustama Rabbi Akiva da'amar bidei adam in. Bidei shamayim lo. But remember again, this was the position of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds that a sris adam can do chalitza. Why? Remember what was Rabbi Akiva's logic? Rabbi Akiva's logic was hoil v'haya lo shas hakosher. since his status is a result of an injury, that means there was a point in time where he wasn't like this. He had a point in time where he was kasha to do chalitza, where again the Gemara said it could have affected marriage, and therefore according to Rabbi Akiva, halacha l'maisi is permitted to go ahead and do chalitza. So the Gemara is just pointing out this statement seems to back up Rabbi Akiva's approach. Good. Weiter. Hasar shechalis livim to lo pasla. Rabbi say along the same lines. So there's a progression, obviously. So right, we just established that a sris doesn't do chalitza. Rabbi say, what happens if a sris did do chalitza? So a simple case: two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven's married, dies without children. His wife Rachel falls to Shimon for yibum. Shimon is a sris. Rabbi say, what does Shimon do regarding yibum? No yibum, no chalitza, nothing. Rabbi say, now again, I'm sidestepping the machlokes over here of, well, what type of sris is Shimon, right? Because let's leave that on the side for just a moment. So I'll say, so there's no chalitza, no yibum by Shimon. So what happens if Shimon does do chalitza? But if he does do chalitza, so the Mishnah said, lo pasla. What does lo pasla mean? He does not go ahead and make his sister-in-law into a chalusa, which would then preclude her from marrying a Kohen. So I will say, so essentially it's another way of saying that if Shimon does chalitza, what is the status of the chalitza? What's the status of it? Meaningless and purposeless. It just does not matter for anything. To which the Gemara says, now, interestingly enough, the Mishnah said, however, what happens if Shimon the Sris has relations with his sister-in-law? So it's not Yibum, but it's an act of Znus, and ultimately, again, that would preclude her from marrying a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, Time of the Ba'alo. The reason, ultimately, again, why he would preclude her from marrying a Kohen is because he had relations with her. Ha'acher lo. And I will say what's interesting about this is, now look at Rashi, by the way, last Rashi in the Daf, time of the Ba'alahu, Dahavya Zona, the Nivala La'ache Baila Shalom B'makom Mitzvah, V'hi Haisala B'kares. See, I will say, if Shimon has relations with Rachel, so ultimately, again, he precludes her from marrying a Kohen. Why? Because that act of relations renders her a Zona. Right? Because we're supposed to remember, again, she's now had relations with her brother-in-law, Shelo b'makom mitzvah, which is asr, a very serious isser. So therefore, again, that act of relations precludes her from marrying a Kohen because now she is a Zona. The Rabbi say, interesting enough, the Gemara says, ha'acher lo. What if Rachel were to have relations with another man? So we can infer from the Mishnah that halacha l'maisa, that act of relations would not preclude her from marrying a Kohen. Top of Pei Aleph, Leima tehevet yufta de Rav Hamnuna. This seems to refute the position of Rav Hamnuna, because what does Rav Hamnuna say? The Amar shomeres yavam shezinsa psula, right? Psuli yivama. Ultimately, psuli yavma. So we'll say, so ultimately again, right. So Shemeret Yom, this is a psul. So what do you see from here? So according to Rav Hamnuna, he holds that a Shemeret Yom, a woman waiting for Yibum, who has relations with another man, is now psula liyivama. I'm sorry. Rashi says, or psula liyivama, ke'ishes ish shezinsa shasur labayla. The Chayva and the Zona is supposed to listen to this. This is actually a fascinating case. Reuven dies, leaves behind the widow Rachel, right? And Reuven leaves behind the brother Shimon. Just a regular yibum. Okay, forget about Swiss for just a moment. So what happens now? Rachel is waiting for him. She's a shomeres yavam. Rachel now goes and has relations with Yehuda, unrelated man. Rav Hamnuna says she is now prohibited to do yibum with Shimon. Why? Because Rabbi say essentially we look at it as if she committed an act of adultery. That since there's a zika, right? Since there's a zika, there's a marital bond. She now had relations with another man. We'll say, what's talacha by adultery? Asr lebal ulaboel. The adulteress becomes prohibited to her husband and to the man with whom she committed adultery with. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that according to Rav Hamnuna, when a shomeres yavam has relations with another man who is not her yavam, that makes her into a zona. So the Gemara is just saying that halacha l'maisa, our Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rav Hamnuna, because Rav Hamnuna makes it sound like the only act of relations that would make Rachel, the Yevama, zona, is zona, and precluded from marrying into the kahuna, is relations with her sris yavam. But relations with another man would not make her a zona. To which the Gemara says, lo, it's not true. No. We accept Rav Hamluna's position. And if the Yevamo were to have relations with another man who's not her Yavam, that would make her a zona and preclude her from marrying into the kahuna. Va'idi de Tana Reisha Bididei, Tana Nami Seifa Bididei. The Gemara says it's just Mishnaic symmetry. Since the beginning of the Mishnah was talking about the impact of relations with the Sris Yavam, so too we maintained that textual symmetry throughout as well. Incredible. Excuse me. Sorry. V'chein eilenis shechaltzu la'achin. So I'll say, remember again, same idea the Mishnah said. If you have an eilenis, and the brothers did chalitza with her, what's the impact of the chalitza on the eilenis? And the answer is nothing, right? Because she's not subject to chalitza. However, if one of the brothers had relations with her, then einachinami, that would preclude her from marrying into the kahuna. The reason why, because there's relations. Halo ba'alu lo. But I will say, interestingly enough, if there were no relations, then the eilenis would just be a widow. And as a widow, she'd be permitted to marry a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, Kiman, Tilo Rabbi Yehuda. It's not Rabbi Yehuda. Why? This is actually fascinating. The Rabbi Yehuda ha'amar eilenis zonahi. I will say, this is absolutely fascinating. Rabbi Yehuda holds that an eilenis is a zona. I will say, now what does that mean? Right? A zona is a very specific... Now, here's what's interesting. We actually have seen this before. When we see the word zona, we automatically think, right? Immorality. Rabbi Yehuda holds zona is more of a category. So I'll say, so take a look at Rashi. So the Amr Island is zonahi. I realize that's an open-ended question. If I ask zona, what do you think? Probably not a good question to throw out. Good. So the Gemara says as follows: Amr Island is zonahi. Look at Rashi. So Rashi says, Beparak habal yevimto v'yolif leime his nuvelo yifritzu. So we'll say essentially what Rabbi Yehuda says is that halacha l'maisa, any woman with whom a normative marriage cannot be effected essentially has the status of zona. So therefore, he would hold an eilenis, which I will say, who cannot affect a normative marriage, and that there's no possibility of the fulfillment of the mitzvah period of arivia, ultimately falls into the zona status. Okay, our Mishnah clearly does not reflect that view. Good. I will say, let's go weiter. Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is continuing on the same topic. Well, same topic, but different application. Sris Chama Kohen, Shenasa Bas Yisrael. So we'll say, here we go. Let's say you have a Kohen. And this Kohen is a Sris Chama, which means he was born with this condition. And he marries a Bas Yisrael. So we'll say, so remember again, our Mishnah is reflecting the view ultimately again of the previous issue, that halacha l'maisa, a sris chama has the ability to affect marriage. So therefore we'll say, when it says Pitsudako krushavcha lo yava bekal Hashem, that's talking about sris adam. That's sris adam. So therefore says the Mishnah, if a sris chama goes ahead, sris chama was a coin, marries a Bas Yisrael, machila b'truma, he entitles her to truma, which Rabbi say tells you what? If he entitles her to truma, what does that tell you? It's a normative marriage. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Omrim. So we'll say again, that's fact one. Rashi says over here, Sris Chama Kohen, Aval Sris Adam Mifsal Nami Pasala Mitruma, Tebei Nasha, Tahina B'Tzuadaka. So, okay, good. So it says, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Androgynous Kohen Shenasa Bas Yisrael, Machila B'Truma. Wow. Fascinating. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon hold that if you have a Kohen who is an androgynous, right, an androgynous Kohen who goes ahead and marries a Bas Yisrael, that marriage allows her to eat truma. Fascinating. Look at Rashi. Actually, not yet. Actually, look at it. Fine, Rashi. It says, Machili b'truma, the kaman mefarsha b'truma bizman hazeh d'rabanan. Ava b'midi da'oraisa lo, my time of safek-ish. Obviously, we're going to see that when the Mishnah says that an androgynous Kohen who marries a woman enables his wife to eat truma, that's talking about truma bizman hazak, contemporary truma, which is drabanan. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar. If you have a tumtum, remember again, who's the tumtum? This is a person who has a membrane over the sexual organs, so we don't know what the gender of this person is. So let's say the membrane is opened, v'nimtza zachar, and it turns out that he's a man. Lo yachlotz, he still doesn't do chalitza. Why? Mipnei shehu kisris. Ultimately, because even though his gender has been revealed, halacha lamaisa, we assume that such an individual, by definition, is sterile, is isris. Therefore, again, no chalitza. Androgynous, no se avalonisa. So we'll say, interesting enough, an androgynous can marry, but cannot be married by someone else. Now, what does this mean? An androgynous who marries a woman, such a marriage will be effective. But if a man marries an androgynous, such a marriage is not effective, which essentially is saying what? That we treat an androgynous as a man l'chumra. That's pretty much it. So therefore, if he marries a woman, we look at that marriage as valid, at least on a rabbinic level. But he cannot marry a man. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, androgynous chayavan alav skila kizachar. To the point Rabbi Eliezer says that if one androgynous if a man marries an androgynous or has relations with an androgynous, we treat that like mishkav zachar, like a homosexual behavior, like a homosexual relationship, and ultimately, again, one would be chayiv skila for such a relationship. Okay, so we'll say that's the Mishnah. So let's analyze. So we'll say let's take a look at the first case. What was the first case? You have a Kohen Sris Chama who marries a Bas Yisrael. Kohen Sris Chama who marries a Bas Yisrael. So we'll say under that circumstance, halacha l'maisa. Under that circumstance, halacha l'maisa, what do we say? Under that circumstance, what do we say? That he enables her to eat truma. To which the Gemara says, pshita. Okay, like what's the pshat? In other words, that's obvious. Once you say, but remember again, what's the Bas Yisrael's ticket to eating? What's her ticket to eating truma? A valid marriage. So once you tell me that she can marry a Sris Chama, what more really is there to talk about? To which the Gemara says something very interesting. So the Gemara says, Pshita maled him. What would you have thought? Molid ma'achil she'ena molid eina ma'achil. You might have thought that maybe only a union that's capable of producing children enables her to eat, but a union that's not capable of producing children doesn't allow her to eat. Now, Bosai, why would you have a havamina that only a union which produces children? Because Bosai, think about this. Remember again, a Bas Yisrael, if her husband dies, what enables her to continue to eat truma? Children. So you might have thought like offspring. And by the way, we've seen already before, it doesn't just have to be children, it could also potentially be what? Grandchildren. But the idea is offspring. Offspring is what allows her to continue. So you might have thought that her only license to eat truma is when she is in a relationship that will allow for the continuity of that truma consumption. What type of relationship allows for continuity of truma consumption? A relationship that could produce children. But in this case, she's married to a Sris Chama. There is no possibility for children. Kamash Malan, though. Kamash Malan, it's a legal marriage. A legal marriage which allows for her truma consumption, and therefore, again, this is a legal marriage. And therefore, Allah Chalamais, even though it can't produce children, she can eat truma. Incredible. Let's go back to Amr Shlakish. So we'll say, I'm sorry, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Omer androgynous. So we'll say, next case in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon said, this was actually very, very interesting, an androgynous Kohen who married a Bas Yisrael, he enables her to eat truma. Rabbi said, now just understand the godless of that is, what's the status of an androgynous? Safek. So we'll say, so remember again, let's play this out. There's one or two possibilities about the nature of this marriage. What are the two possibilities? Right, so androgynous Kohen marries a Bas Yisrael. What are the two possibilities of the marriage? Either it's good, right? It's good, it's a man marrying a woman, or it's two women. Now, I will say, the saving grace, if it's two women, is we just had this Gemara just a couple of days ago, that if two women engage in a relationship with each other, so again, it's pritzos. It's pritzos, but it does not violate the oraisas. So that's kind of how we hedge our bets a little bit. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, here is the problem. how does that actually allow for truma consumption? So it says, very interesting. Rish Lakish says this type of marriage will enable the Bas Yisrael to eat truma, but not chazeh v'shok. Let's remember again, chazeh v'shok is the chest and the leg of an animal. Whenever you go ahead and shecht an animal, whenever you shecht a Beis HaMikdash is standing, there's matnos kuna, portions you have to give to the kohen. Whenever you shecht an animal, whatever you shecht, you give the chest and you give the leg, the foreleg, to the kohen. So Reish Lakish says this type of marriage will allow this woman to eat truma, but won't allow her to go ahead and eat chazeh v'shok, chest and leg. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, she could even eat chazeh v'shok. What's going on over here? I will say, now, if you look at Rashi, Rabbi Yochanan says, af ma'achila de zachar ma'al yuhu. And I will say, so remember again, what it sounds like is, Reish Lakish says, you can't eat chazeh v'shok. Why? What are we concerned about? Maybe the androgynous is a woman, and it's not a valid marriage. Rabbi Yochanan seems to say, no, she could eat chazeh v'shok because we treat an androgynous like a zohar, like a man. So we'll say, let's analyze this. So Reish Lakish, you said the androgynous, right? The wife of the androgynous cannot eat chazeh v'shok because maybe he's a woman. Or maybe it's a woman. So if that's the case, I don't understand. It can't eat chazeh v'shok. Ma'ishta chazeh v'shok doraisa. Ma'ishta chazeh v'shok. Why can't she eat? Why can't the Bas Yisrael wife of an androgynous Kohen, all right, Bas Yisrael wife of an androgynous Kohen, why can't she eat chazeh v'shok? Because that's doraisa. Truma nami doraisa. Truma is also doraisa. Right, so why can she eat truma? What are we talking about? When the Mishnah says that the wife of an androgynous Kohen could eat truma, what type of truma are we referring to? Truma bisman hazeh, contemporary truma, which is dirabanan. Aval bisman shebeis hamikdash kayimai. But when the Beis Hamikdash stands or stood, and the Eretz Hashem will stand again, what's going to be the halacha? Lo, the wife, the Bas Yisrael wife of an androgynous Kohen will not be permitted to eat truma. Now, Rabbi say, so I just want to point out something really incredible. So Rabbi say, here's where we're holding right now. First of all, Rabbi say, I have to tell you, the most startling piece of this entire discussion is what so far? What's the most startling? It's hard to discern what's the most startling piece of all this. Now, let's say, what is startling about this is we've gone through our entire lives thinking that everyone agrees androgynous is safek. And yet, what do you see coming out over here? Not everyone agrees to that. There are opinions who definitively treat androgynous as zachar, as a man. Riveting. Absolutely riveting. So again, that's what's most startling about this. You have Rabbi Yochanan essentially saying, no, androgynous is a man. Androgynous is a man. Which is why that if an androgynous Kohen marries a woman, she could eat chazeh v'shok and truma doraisas. This guy is a man. So I'll say, but again, now we're reframing something. Now what we're saying is our Mishnah is treating androgynous as safek. So if androgynous is safek, then when an androgynous Kohen goes in and marries a Bas Yisrael, how is she permitted to eat truma? To which the Gemara says, truma bisman hazeh. Contemporary truma d'Rabbanan. But in Achinami, an androgynous Kohen who marries a Bas Yisrael does not entitle her to eat anything of a Da'oraisa status. Only d'Rabbanan. So let's analyze. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, Adatani, in Machil v'chazeh v'shok, liflog v'lisni b'didei. If that's the case, I will say, then why do you even have to bring in chazeh v'shok? Just make a distinction in truma itself and say the following: when is this so that an androgynous Kohen enables his Bas Yisrael wife to consume truma? B'truma d'Rabbanan, aval b'truma d'Oraisa lo. I would say, so again, don't bring in chazeh v'shok. What do you even have to bring that in? Make the distinction itself within truma. When does an androgynous Kohen enable his Bas Yisrael wife to eat truma? With truma d'Rabbanan, contemporary truma, but with truma d'Oraisa, he would not enable her to do so. To which the Gemara says, Hachanami ka'amar. The Gemara says, Kishu ma'achila b'truma bizman hazeh d'Rabbanan. Ve'ein ma'achila bizman chazeh v'shok va'afilu b'truma d'Rabbanan. Wow. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Here's the point that we're trying to make. When we say, let me read that once more. Kishu machila, when we say that an androgynous kohen has the ability to enable his wife to eat truma, what type of truma? So the Gemara says, machila b'truma bizman hazed drabanan. That's saying he enables her to eat contemporary truma, which is drabanan. Ve'ein ma'achila bizman chazeh v'shok. But Rabbi say, listen to this. But wherever there is a point in time where chazeh v'shok is being consumed, ultimately, again, not only can she not eat chazeh v'shok, but she wouldn't even be permitted to eat truma d'Rabbanan during that time. Why? Dil ma'asi la'ochla b'truma da'oraisa. Rabbi say this is fascinating. So there's really two halachas happening over here. Halacha number one, Rabbi say, is that a wife of an androgynous kohen is permitted to eat truma d'Rabbanan. But when is she permitted to eat truma d'Rabbanan? Only when there is no such thing as truma d'oraisa. Because Rabbi said, listen to this. And when is there truma d'oraisa? By the way, when does truma d'oraisa exist? When there's a Beis Hamikdash, when there's chazeh v'shok, matnos kuna d'oraisa. So when there's no chazeh v'shok or truma d'oraisa, a wife of an androgynous kohen could eat truma d'Rabbanan. Fine. But I will say, when there's chazeh v'shok, she certainly can't eat that. And when there's chazeh v'shok, so she can't eat chazeh, which is d'oraisa. She can't eat truma d'oraisa, but she wouldn't even be permitted to eat truma d'Rabbanan. Why? Lest you come to give her truma d'oraisa. So it's only temporarily where the only thing we have is truma d'Rabbanan, and therefore there's no concern that if you let her eat truma d'Rabbanan, she's going to come to eat something d'oraisa that the wife of an androgynous kohen could consume. But again, were she to live in a time where there are matnos kuna d'oraisa, truma d'oraisa, she would not even be permitted to eat truma d'Rabbanan, lest she come to eat truma d'oraisa. I will say, by the way, just to distinguish between truma d'Rabbanan and truma d'oraisa, there's two different types of truma d'Rabbanan. For example, today, right, there's a truma d'Rabbanan. But even when truma's d'oraisa, truma's meister, truma d'oraisa, ultimately, again, truma d'Rabbanan, I'll say, is not every type of food item is subject to truma obligation d'oraisa. Some foods only have a biblical obligation in truma. We're going to discuss this in just a bit. So what the Gemara is saying is like this: truma d'Rabbanan you could give her when there's no possibility of truma d'oraisa. But if there's a possibility of truma d'oraisa, she can't even eat truma d'Rabbanan lest you come to give her truma d'oraisa. Beautiful, great. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, he says af ma'achila b'chazeh v'shok. Now Rabbi Yochanan is obviously of the opinion that an androgynous is a man. So because androgynous is a man, therefore that marriage enables her to just eat everything. So she could even eat chazeh v'shok. Amarli Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, let me ask you, mi savris truma bizman hazeh d'Rabbanan. So I'll say now let's kind of like pull out of this a little bit. So forgive me androgynous for just a moment. So I'll say at the root of this is the nature nature of truma bizman hazeh. So Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, tell Reish Lakish, do you hold that truma bizman hazeh, right, contemporary truma, ultimately again is d'Rabbanan? Amrali in Reish Lakish says, yes, I do. Shani Shona, because I'll tell you, I'll give you halacha that proves this point. Listen to this. Eagle ba'agolim ole. So I'll say, here's the case. This is a case. Eagle, I'll say, is a cake of pressed figs. So imagine for a moment you have a cake of pressed figs of truma that falls into other cakes of pressed figs that are chulin. Ola means it's bottle. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Sha'ani Shona, Brisa, here we go. Eagle shal truma, bottle b'meya shal chulin. So listen to this. If you have a cake of pressed figs, an eagle, I'm going to start translating. Eagle means a cake of pressed figs. You have an eagle of truma that got mixed in with 100 other cakes of chulin. O eagle shal truma tmeya, bottle b'kufi gulim shal truma Torah. Or for that matter, one eagle of truma tmeya that got mixed in with 100 cakes of regular truma, of truma tahora. So we'll say, now what's the halacha? So Reish Lakish, what's the halacha? It's batal. It's batal in a ratio of 100 to 1. Now here's what's interesting. So it says Reish Lakish, Vitruma bizman hazeh da'araisa, kevan di'igul davar chashafu, v'darko limonus, lo batal, af agav the truma stein d'rabanan, holu truma da'araisa nahages, lo mevatlin d'rabanan, gzira rabbanan at d'araisa. So I'll say, listen to this. So Reish Lakish says, the fact that truma tameya, or for that matter, truma is batal and chulin in a 100 to 1 ratio, tells us that what? Truma bizman hazeh is d'rabanan. Because we'll say if truma was d'oraisa, this would not be batal. Now we'll say, why would this not be batal? Why would a cake of pressed figs? Let's just take a simple case. I have a cake of pressed figs of truma that falls into 100 other cakes of chulin. They all look the same, obviously. Right? So Reish Lakish is saying it's batal in a ratio of 100 to 1. That must mean that truma is d'rabanan. Because if truma is d'oraisa, bittul should not work. Why would bittul not work? So Rabbi say, we're going to get into this now, but we assume the cake of pressed figs is something called a davar shebeminyan. Davar shebeminyan, Rabbi say, is something that has a unique singular identity. Right, that each cake is looked at as its own individual identity. We're going to see what it also means is these are items that are sold as individual units and are never sold in, or are not normally sold in bulk. Under normal circumstances, if something has a daraisa entity, it should not be batal. The fact that it's batal means that halacha lamaisa only has a rabbinic identity and not a biblical one. This is Reish Lakish's proof. To which Rabbi Yochanan responds, but one second, Amrlei, v'halo ani shona, chaticha bechatichos ola. But one second. Rabbi Yochanan says back, but I'll give you another case. Look at Rashi. Amrlei, next Rashi, kilomar mi islecha lemeimar, lemigzar, bahach drabanan atu daraisa, inami achis libatuli b'daraisa lavisurhu, shari ani shona chaticha shel chatos tmeya, batal b'tahora. Rabbi Yochanan says, but one second. I'll tell you a different case. If a piece of, let's say, imagine for a moment, you have a piece of chatas meat, and it gets mixed together with your prime rib, right, that you were going to have for dinner. So Rabbi Yochanan says, it's batal. Now, Bosai, a piece of chatas, Bosai, there's one thing that's clear. There's no such thing as what? No such thing as what? Chatas d'rabanan, right? Right? There's no such thing, right? Chatas d'araisa. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm going to show you a case of the araisas that are batal. So what Rabbi Yochanan, before we get into the substance of this, what Rabbi Yochanan is trying to show Reish Lakish is Reish Lakish was trying to prove that from the fact that an eagle of truma gets mixed in with chulin and is batal, that indicates to us that the truma is d'rabanan. To which Rabbi Yochanan responds, not necessarily. Bittul is not indicative of necessarily rabbinic status. I'll give you a case of doraisa, piece of chatos that gets mixed in with the rest of your permitted prime rib. Halacha lamaisa. Now again, it's batal. Obviously, chatas is doraisa, so bittul is not indicative of rabbinic status. Now, I'll go back to Rashi for just a moment. Now, Rashi points out over here something very interesting. In the last couple lines of Rashi, V'afagav de darko limonos dami, sabris kol shedarko limonos shaninu, de lo batal. Es shedarko limonos beminyan shaninu, shasu miyucha leminyan. Avachaticha v'igo pamim shimnim karim ba'omen, afagav de regilus limonos, hol ve'en miyucha lekach. So I'll say, we're going to now get into a fundamental machlokes. We're going to come back to Rashi. Let's say what's driving all of this is as follows. Well, actually, let's read it inside. Says the Gemara, "Mi savris," to which Reish Lakish responds, "Mi savris kol shedarko limonos shaninu, es shedarko limonos shaninu." But say, wow. Okay, a little bit of hilchos bittul. Here we go. Normally, you're both say an item gets mixed into another. Depending on the nature of the mixture, the type of items in the mixture will determine the halachos of bittul. As you mentioned before, there's something called a davar shebeminyan. So I'll say davar shebeminyan means an item that has an individual identity. And any item that has an individual identity is not bata. I'll say, let me illustrate this. I'll give you a good example of an item that doesn't have an individual identity. What's a good item that doesn't have an individual identity? Right? Drop of milk, right? But it has to be something that's a grape. A grape is an individual item, but no one buys a grape, right? You buy a cluster, you buy a pound, right? No one buys. But a grape is an individual, because a drop of milk is not an individual thing, right? A grape is an individual thing, but it's always sold as part of a group. One can make the argument, even an egg. No one buys an egg. Did Dovi Elman say an egg? Was that the tap on the shoulder? Good. Right, so it's good. So ultimately, again, an egg. Right, an egg is a perfect example. Right? That lemaisa again. No one buys an egg. You buy a dozen eggs, 2 dozen eggs. So I will say that. So here's in halal, as opposed to let's give a dramatic example of this. A davar sheba minyan. All right, actually, we'll give examples in just a moment. So here's the question. So a davar sheba minyan means something that is sold as an individual item. Sold as an individual item. I'm sorry? All right, so the truth is, actually, a good example of this is actually going to be a cake of pressed figs. That's going to be a good example, right? We don't have to look too far, right? So an eagle is often sold as an individual cake. Right? Person buys a cake. Now, we'll say, here's what's interesting. In order to become a davar sheba minyan, does it have to be that the item is exclusively sold as an individual entity, or that it's often sold as an individual entity, but sometimes sold as bulk? So both say, this is where the cake of pressed figs comes in, because it's actually quite fascinating. A cake of pressed figs is often sold as individual cakes, but sometimes it's sold in bulk. So we'll say, look at the lashon. V'halo anishona. So misavris kol shedarko. We'll say kol shedarko limanashin means items which are commonly sold individually. Es shedarko limnos shaninu means items that are exclusively sold as individuals. So Reish Lakish says, Rabbi Yochanan, do you think that a davar sheba minyan is kol shedarko? No, it means es shedarko. And we'll say, now watch this. Reish Lakish is saying to Rabbi Yochanan, that's why the cases of the chatos meat that get mixed in with your prime rib, they're batal. Rabbi said, you know why it's batal? Because slices of meat are often sold individually, but not always sold individually. So therefore, they fall into the category of what we call kol shedarko limnos. Reish Lakish says kol shedarko limnos, items that are sometimes sold individually, but not always, are batal. It is only items which are exclusively sold individually that are never batal in a mixture. I will say, just the logic is, if you have an item that's exclusively sold as an individual entity, that endows it with a chashivos, with an importance. And it's that importance, ultimately, again, that prevents it from being batal barov. I will say, by the way, I'll point out to you something amazing. This is why, we're learning this in our Chassidus Chabur last night. So much of being a Jew means being part of the Am, being part of the nation, right? Being part of Am Yisrael. So I will say, sometimes when we focus on Achdus and being part of the Klal, what do people often worry about? But if I'm part of the Klal, if I'm part of the collective, then it must mean that what? I'm batal barov. Where's my individuality? Where's my place? I said, now you come to this halacha. A yid is es shedarko limnos. Right? A Jew has individual importance. Every single Jew is so incredibly unique, and every single Jew is so incredibly special. It's es shedarko limnos. You have individual importance. So when you have something that always has individual importance, even if you mix it in, put it into the mixture, it's never batal barov. It could become part of the mixture, but I'm not batal in the mixture. That's the beauty of Achdus. I'm part of the mixture, but chas v'shalom, I don't lose my individuality. I'm not batal, I'm not lost in a sea of people. Baruch Hashem, I'm complemented by everyone and everything around me. Back to the Gemara. Maihi. So what's an example of this? We don't have to search for examples. This is great. This nan, listen to this. This nan, Misha hayulu chavili tilson shal kloya kerem. Listen to this case. Let's say someone had bundles. Tilson is fenugreek. So a person had bundles of fenugreek, of kloya kerem, which also means you had illegal fenugreek. You got busted with illegal fenugreek. Right? So you're trying to smuggle in the illegal fenugreek. So I'll say, so what happened? This was kloya kerem. So for example, you were growing fenugreek in your vineyard. Not allowed. So now you have a bundle of it. I will say, so it's kloya kerem. What do you do with kloya kerem? What do you have to do with it? You have to destroy it. So I will say, yidlaku. Ultimately, you have to destroy it. Now what happens? What happens? Your bundles of fenugreek got mixed in with what? Other permitted bundles of fenugreek. All right, Amud Beis. Kulan yidlaku divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you have to burn. You have to burn all of them. You have to burn them. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The Chacham say no. Yalu be'echadu masayim. The Chacham say that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and burn them. Oh, excuse me. They're bottle as long as what? It's a ratio of 200 to 1. Now, go back to Rashi for just a moment. Kulan yidlaku. Rabbi Meir says you have to burn them all. So it says Rashi, de lo batli. Ultimately, again, because they're not bottle. Why are they not bottle? Kediktanitem Rabbi Meir Omer kol shedarko limnos mekadish es hamis arev imo ve'in bottle barov sheklaya kerem davar she'in b'minyan b'telim be'echar. We're supposed to listen to this. Here's an example. And I will say, let's see. I don't have to read Rashi. We can read in the Gemara. Rabbi Meir says, Kol shedarko limnos mikadish. Rabbi Meir says, Kol. We'll say, remember again. Let's just remember these terms. Kol shedarko limnos means what? Means what? Any item which what is commonly sold as individual units, ultimately is not bottle in the mixture. That's kol shedarko limnos. Ultimately, says the Gemara. So, and therefore, again, fenugreek is good to know. Our bundle, right? Is fenugreek sold as individual bundles or in bulk? And the answer is both. It's more commonly sold as individual bundles, but it's not uncommon for it to be sold in bulk. Rabbi Meir says, since it's commonly sold as individual units, that endows each bundle with its own unique chashivos, and that individual chashivos precludes it from being bottle barov. Therefore, when your bundle of fenugreek, of klaya kerem, gets mixed in with other bundles of fenugreek, it's not bottle, you have to burn the entire mixture. The Chachamim say no. Halacha l'maisa, it's bottle. Now again, you need a higher ratio, right? You need 200 to 1, but l'maisa, it's bottle. The Chacham say, Eino mekadish ala shisha dvarim bilvad. The Chacham say, I will say, listen to this. According to the Chachamim, there are only 6 things. There are only 6 things that are what we call kol shedarko limnos. Only 6 things which are exclusively sold as individual units and never sold in bulk. Rabbi Akiva Shiva, Rabbi Akiva says it's not 6, it's 7. All right, we'll say, what are they? This is incredible. Here's the list. Eluain, egoze prach nuts. Well, say says prach is the name of a place. Egoze prach. Okay, fine, we'll come back to this. We have time. Right, Rimone badan. I will say so, but also name of a place. Pomegranates from place badan. Chavios stumos, sealed barrels of wine. Right? Chalfei tradin, the stalks of beets. Kolchei kruv, the stalks, cabbage stalks. Dilas Yevamos, and ultimately, again, Greek gourds. So I will say, again, reflect. I just want to point out, it's not the pshat I will say that this is like a halacha l'Moshe Misinai, right? Remember, again, what is this list comprised of, right? This is a list of things that, again, in the marketplace, were always exclusively sold as individual units and were never sold in bulk. So I'll say, so remember, again, Today you can go ahead and come up with a different list, right? Like a tin of caviar, right? A tin of caviar. I don't know even caviar, right? A tin of caviar might be something that's called kol shedarko limnos. No one ever buys that in bulk, right? Whatever it might be, the point over here is these are things that are good. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Mosif. This is actually interesting. Rabbi Akiva goes ahead and adds in one more item to the list. What's his additional item? Kikaro shabalabayis. I will say, interestingly enough, loaves made by a balabais. I bake bread in my house. I will say that's also called es shedarko limnos. Why? Which makes sense. Why I will say? Because as opposed to a bakery where you're mass producing, right, bread that you make in your house, each loaf is significant, and therefore halacha l'maisa, not bottle. Incredible. So we'll say, so this is the list. So therefore the Gemara says, Haru'uyin la'arla l'klaya kerem. Look at Rashi. Haru'uyin la'arla kigone gozin v'rimonim v'chavios mikadshin v'osun esakshir mishum arla. Let's all say, so some items on this list ultimately are subject to the halachos of arla. Some items on this list are subject to the halachos of klaya kerem. The point Rabbi say over here is, if one of these items is arla and falls into a mixture of non-arla items, what's going to be the halacha? What's going to be the halacha? Right? It makes everything usher. One of these items is klaya kerem and falls into a permitted mixture, going to make everything usher, because these items are never batal. So Rabbi say, here we go. Rabbi Yochanan Savar es shedarko limno shaninu. Reish Lakish Samar Kol Shedarko Limnos Shaninu. So Rabbi say the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Remember again, the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish ultimately is going to be what? Is going to be halacha lamaisa. What is the definition of a davar shebeminyan? Rabbi Yochanan holds Kol Shedarko Limnos. As long as an item is commonly sold in bulk, that's going to be enough to endow it with an individual chashivos and ultimately tell you that halacha lamaisa. I'm sorry, thank you. If something is exclusively sold as an individual unit, then it'll never be batal. Reish Lakish will say no, even if it's not exclusively, but commonly sold, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, it won't be batal. Now, both say, now why is this important? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Reish Lakish Sarah Kol Shedarko Limnos. I feel the prakim shaninu the lo batal hilchach eagle isag naitcha truma bizman zedaraisa lo haya batal. So we'll say, let's go back. Remember again, how did this entire conversation start? This conversation started because Rabbi, remember again, the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, an androgynous kohen who marries his wife, marries a bas Yisrael, allows her to eat truma. Reish Lakish said, right, only truma and not chazei v'shok. Why only truma, not chazei b'shok? Ultimately, again, because truma is d'rabanan. Truma is d'rabanan. They will say, how did Reish Lakish prove that? Because halacha l'maisa, again, the case of the truma cake of pressed figs got mixed in with the other non-truma cake of pressed figs, and what? Was batal. It can only be batal ultimately, again, because halacha l'maisa, it's truma d'rabanan. Because otherwise, if it was truma d'oraisa, Reish Lakish holds kol shedarko limnos, anything commonly sold individually, even if not exclusively, is not batal. If that's the case, a cake of pressed figs is commonly sold individually, and if it was truma d'oraisa, it should not be batal. The fact that it's batal indicates to us what? That it's truma d'rabanan. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, my chaticha was the case of the chaticha. The sanyo chaticha shel chatos tameya shenitz arva b'meya chaticha shel chatos toros. If you have a piece of chatos tameya, right, to say of a chatos tameya that got mixed in with 100 other pieces of chatos tahora, v'chein prusa shalechem hapanim tameya shenis arva b'meya pruso shalechem hapanim toros. Or I say, for that matter, you have a piece of lechem hapanim. Listen to this: a piece of lechem hapanim which became tameh, that got mixed in with 100 pieces of lechem hapanim tahora. What's talacha? Tala. Ultimately, again, it's batal. Wow, it's batal. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Huda Omer lo sala. Rabbi Huda says it's not batal. Rabbi say Rashi says over here, why is that lo sala? Totally, we're throwing something else, another curveball into this. Tikasar Rabbi Huda b'chol duchta min b'mino lo batal. I will say this is something else. Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that whenever you have two like items which are mixed together, it's not going to be batal. Aval chaticha shel chatas Torah shenis arva b'mea chaticha shel chulin tohoros. But I will say, if you have a situation of a piece of chatas Torah that gets mixed in with 100 pieces of meat of chulin, or prusa shlechem apanim Torah shenis arva b'mea prusa shel chulin, or for that matter, again, a piece of lechem apanim which gets mixed in with 100 pieces of chulin bread, divrei hakol lo saleh. Everyone agrees, ultimately, it's not batal. So also we'll have to stop over here. But Lamais again, we'll pick up with this piece of but I just want to point out, there's two major machloksim now unfolding over here. Remember again, there's in general, again I will say, what this started was as seemingly a machlokes as the status of truma bizman hazeh, right? Truma d'oraisa, truma d'rabanan bizman hazeh. And I will say now what it has kind of blossomed into is a general discussion regarding bittul. And specifically, again, do we say kol shedarko limnos or esh shedarko limnos? In a davar shebeminyan, when we say a davar shebeminyan is not batal, What defines a davar sheva minyan? Is it an item eshedarka limnos that is exclusively sold individually, or kol shedarka limnos commonly sold individually? We also just threw in here into the mix. Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'mina lo batal, like items are never batal. The resolution and combination of all of these ideas, Emir Hashem, tomorrow. Shkar chabosai. Welcome back. Welcome back, Emir Hashem. Great to see you. All right, Chevron Zuma, good Shabbos, everyone.